Good morning, YouTube. In July, we traveled to Kaede, Wyoming. And while we were there, we visited the Buffalo Bill Museum. It was there that I saw the Joseph Sharp cabin for the first time. Joseph Sharp cabin was built at the base of the mountain, not far from where Little Bighorn took place, and just 3 miles from where Custer took his last stand. Joseph Sharp always considered himself the owner of the cabin that he and Addie had built, but in reality, it was government property, and it wasn't until 1922, when it went up for auction, that he was able to purchase it. In the 1980s, Forrest Fenn acquired the Joseph Sharp estate that included the cabin. Forrest Fenn told me that he paid $15,000 for the cabin. When he bought it, there was a lady that was living inside the cabin. She was afraid she was going to get kicked out, but Forrest Fenn told her, "No, you can live here as long as you want, on one condition, that you let me know when you move out." He knew that if the cabin stayed empty, that it was a high likelihood that it would get vandalized. So after about a year, she let him know she was moving out. And then he contacted the Buffalo Bill Museum, and they made arrangements to have the cabin moved. On September 13th, I got a chance to meet with Forrest Fenn in Santa Fe and talk with him a little bit more about Joseph Sharp. They arranged to have the cabin transported, and it was pretty much transported all in one piece.
They wrapped it up with ropes and things so it wouldn't fall apart.
Okay.
But they were very careful, and they put it in. They had to take a wall down to get it in there.
Oh, they did.
But you've seen it's landscape. There are aspen trees around it and grass, and I think they did a very good job.
Oh, they did. Forrest Fenn told me that it used to be really common for people to put things under the floorboards of their cabins. So when they got ready to move the Joseph Sharp cabin, he told the people, "Make sure you look under the floorboard." And they did. They found an old hammer under there. So he told them, when the cabin gets moved, make sure you put that hammer back under the floorboard. Sometime later, he was at the museum in Kaede, and he said he saw that hammer sitting on a shelf, and he wasn't very happy about it. So he made them get a shovel, and they lifted the floorboard of the cabin, and they put that hammer back under the floorboard.
My biography, I'd never done it before. I'd written one little book about William R. Lee, but I started writing on the yellow pad with a pencil. And when I'd make a mistake, instead of scratching through it, I'd erase it. I mean, that's how raw I was in the writing business. And over a period of time, I was running my gallery at the same time, and I didn't have a computer, didn't want a computer, but I had endless information on 3x5 cards. And I arranged them chronologically. So I'd take 5x7 cards. I'd take a card out and start writing my book based on what's on those cards, and then I'd put it in the back and take the next card out. But I wrote, I think, 85,000 words over a period of a couple of years.
Wow.
And then I wasn't happy, and I started rewriting, and I rewrote, and finally ended up with 65,000 words. I got rid of 20,000 words. And the good thing about that book is it's full of information that nobody else had.
Right.
I bought the estate. Willie, I got the scrapbook that his first wife made. Beautiful little scrapbook full of information that nobody had ever heard of before. A book stories had been written about Sharp that were full of inaccuracies. And here I've got the original source material, and I said, I'll just write a book and correct a lot of those old mistakes, and that's how I did that. And I had that book printed in Buena Park, California, 65,000 words, and I was worried about the color. in those days it was hard to get color right, and so I went out there and I told them that I want my signature on every signature before you can print it. A signature was 16 pages and big sheets of paper, and they called me every 3 hours for about 2 or 3 days. I mean, I'd go to my hotel and go to sleep for 3 hours. They'd wake me up. I'd grab a donut and go back and put my signature on it. But we argued about color. If you take the color out, you take the sienna out of this painting, you got to take it out of this one too if they're on the same signature. So we fought about it. Well, you're taking too much out, or put some more. But it was a fight, and they told me that they wanted to, just before they printed the book, they said, "Forrest, sit down. I want you to look at every letter. Every letter, not every word. Every letter. Make sure that it's the I's dotted and the T's and blah blah." And I did that. And they'd tell me, "Forrest, you know what a widow is? A widow is a word or 2 words on the line by itself to finish a sentence. They don't like widows." So he'd say, "Forrest, take 2 words out of this sentence." Take 2 words out of that sentence, and I found out that I could take 2 words out and made the sentence a lot better than it was. So, I learned a lot about, those guys were pros.
Yeah. Now, how long did it take you to write that book there?
I want to say 10 or 12 years, but
Did it?
I was running my gallery,
Right.
and I'd work late at night after I closed the gallery, and a lot of times at midnight or 1 o'clock I'd get sleepy, and so I'd go over to my guest house and jump in a hot tub for 10 or 15 minutes, then I'd go back and work another couple of hours. And I was a zombie the next morning, but I was young and full of it, and I thought I could do everything. And
I don't know how you did it. That's pretty amazing.
well, I was tenacious. I made up my mind I was going to do it, and I was going to do it, and I was going to do it, and that was that. Good or bad.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to write my books, to tell the other side of the story. And my sharp books, The Beat of the Drum and the Hoop of the Dance, it's rare, very rare and out of print today, but I've never been much for bibliography and index and that kind of stuff. It's just too much work for me. But in my sharp book, I did have I think a 2-page bibliography, but I didn't list anything in my bibliography that I didn't own the original source material for.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Forrest Fenn told me how he went to the Crow Agency in Montana 4 different times just so he could hike the footsteps of Joseph Sharp. He said he was armed with only a bedroll on his back and a couple of candy bars. He hiked the Custer battlefield. He said he swam across Little Bighorn River to the Sweat Lodge. And he said he hiked for miles in every direction just to get a feel of what Joseph Sharp could see. As my knowledge of Joseph Sharp expanded, I found a growing parallel in our personal philosophies and interests. We both revered the life the old-time Indian lived and bemoaned the bureaucratic overcast that suffocates the very spirit of his dead.
The 50th reunion of the Custer fight in 1926, that cabin at Crow Agency was the headquarters for the reunion. All the old troopers and Indians that had fought in the battle that were still alive were there. And I've got lots of pictures of those things from 1926. And there was a guest register. And everybody signed in the guest register in that cabin. And that guest register was owned by a lady in Santa Barbara, California. And I saw it. And not only did they sign in, but a lot of them made little drawings and doodles, not only the artists, but the Indians would make some kind of little doodle. It was absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And it was signed by, I can't think of the guy's name that was in the fight. He was at that reunion. He was with Bentina, a retired, Godfrey.
Mm-hmm.
He was either with Bentina or Reno at the fight and survived it. And he signed in that guest register there. And I tried to get that guest register away from that lady, and she wouldn't take anything for it. Well, a few years later, they had a big fire in Santa Barbara, and their house burned down, and lost. The whole thing was lost.
No.
Terrible.
Oh, no.
When you think about all the great historic things that are lost in these forest fires.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. For some reason, I thought that book, was somewhere in a museum. Oh, that's so sad.
It is sad.
One of Joseph Sharp's most famous paintings was Voice of the Great Spirit. For authenticity purposes, he needed a horse head. And one night, the men were all gathered around a potbelly stove warming themselves and talking about this when a grizzly old mountain man came in, heard him talking. He left, and a little while later, he showed back up with a fresh cut horse head.
When Sharp got older, he moved out to Pasadena because the weather was better. But there was a guy by the name of Tom Gilchrist, Gilchrist Museum down. He went to Taos to see Sharp because he wanted to buy some paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And he did buy some paintings, and he ended up over a couple of years with, I want to say, like 275 Sharp paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the contracts between Gilchrist and Sharp. It was part of the estate when I bought it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sharp told Mr. Gilchrist that he could have some of the Indian things in the studio. The studio was full of Indian things.
Mm-hmm.
Not only Southwestern Indians, but the Plains Indian thing, war shirts and different things. And so Sharp and Louise moved out to Pasadena to spend the winter months. And I had a letter from Lois Liebert to Sharp, and it says, "My golly, Mr. Sharp, Mr. Gilchrist came over here with a truck, and they loaded up all the Indian stuff, and he left with all the Indian stuff." And Sharp threw his hands up. "Oh my God!" He said, "But Mr. Gilchrist has been a good client, and he's going to build a museum. It's okay." And so all of those great things, I shouldn't say all of them, I'm talking about a couple hundred pieces, including some important war shirts. They're in the Gilchrist Museum now. But and Gilchrist has a lot of those Sharp portraits. And I keep telling those people over at the Gilchrist Museum they need to get some kind of volunteers or interns in there and look at the Sharp portrait hanging on the wall and look and see if the war shirt that he's wearing is in their collection. I mean, there are war shirts in that collection that were worn in the Custer fight by the Indians. Sharp painted his portrait later with those war shirts on. And I'm sure they're going to find one or two or three of those war shirts in that, but not only war shirts, but pipe bags and
Joseph Sharp was able to photograph many of the Indians, even though they believed that after their photo was taken, a part of their soul went away from them into the picture.
One thing I was reading about were the negatives, that the nitrate negatives, and that, so...
Well, there were two bunches of nitrate negatives.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was owned by a guy, I can't think of his name now, but I used to know him pretty well. I think he lived in Billings. He owned about 1,800 nitrate negatives, and he gave them to the Charlie Russell Museum in Great Falls.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the Charlie Russell Museum that I would print all of those negatives and give them a copy if I could keep a copy for myself. And they said okay, and they sent them all down here, and I did that.
Okay.
But the best collection of Sharp's negatives were in in his studio up in Taos, his first studio, the old Penitentiary Church. They were in a cardboard box, and there was a leak in the roof, and it got all those nitrate negatives wet and absolutely ruined them. Sharp, I have a letter that Sharp wrote about that, and he said he felt so terrible about it, he just took them all out and threw them in the trash, he said.
Oh boy.
But he took those photographs with the idea of making paintings from the photographs, and got over a period of his lifetime. I said in my book that he painted 10,500 paintings, but half of those were portraits of Indians, and a lot of those Indians were Indians that fought in the Custer fight, Sioux and Arapaho and Blackfeet and Cheyenne and Two Moons, who led the entire Cheyenne Nation against Custer, was a good friend of his, and he painted Two Moons' portrait a number of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had read that. I was amazed at how many portraits that he had painted. I had no idea it was that many. In Kaede at the museum, they had the teepee smoke book out, and they
had what?
Teepee smoke.
In order for somebody to go through all the short material that I gave them, they have to have my permission.
Okay.
And Peter Hassard was the director up there for 25 years. I knew him when he was at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew his father, Royal Hassard was his name. So I told him that Peter could do what he wanted to. And he's got some girls working with him up there. And they've got a program, they're going to do a book on Sharp and
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Interviews at Taos Pueblo with Joseph Sunhawk, Elkfoot, Hunting Sun, Balling Deer, all of who had posed for Sharp before 1910, gave me a cherished glance backwards to a time that came alive in their stories, though their sad smiles reflected the reality that passing years are a great equalizer that condemns all stories to the cold storage of time. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Forrest Fenn for taking the time to sit down with us. We had the most amazing, wonderful time. Just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, we wanted to say thank you to Forrest and Peggy Fenn for all the donations that they've made to the Buffalo Bill Museum in Kaede, Wyoming. People are going to benefit from their donations for years and years to come. So thank you very, very much.
I used to have museum people and gallery, the director of the Metropolitan Museum wrote me a letter one time and said, Mr. Fenn, can you help me with blah, 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 blah? And I said, he signed his name, Joe Smith, PhD. And I wrote him back and said, sure, the answer is blah, 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 blah. Forrest Fenn, N-A-D-T. N-A-D-T, not a damn thing. And I wanted one more letter behind my name than PhD. Nobody ever called me on that.